Okay, hello, and today I am delighted to have Lesley Constable with me. And this is a first for me on a couple of levels, really. First, it's the first person I don't know yet. Well, we've known each other for about a minute before we started recording. Um, so, so firstly, yeah, I'd like to, I suppose, thank you ever so much for coming along and giving us your time, Lesley. And hello, yeah,
Hello, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. This should be fun.
great. Okay, so um, one of the reasons I thought it'd be really interesting to sort of have you along is because you are essentially of the hippie generation, the original 60s hippie generation, and that's a time that's always absolutely fascinated me. I'm not. I'm of the punk rock generation, so a kind of a generation later, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, and and that time has always fascinated me, the potential of that time and how much of that was realized and how much of it wasn't, and why it wasn't, and so on and so forth. But basically what I like to do is talk about people's life stories,
Mhm.
and so where I always like to start is at the beginning. So can we kick off by you telling me a little bit about growing up and
Hmm.
the surroundings, when and where, etc.
Well, sure. I think to start, I'm a dual US UK citizen. My parents met because of World War II. My father was injured and placed in a bed next to my mother's British Army cousin in Bristol. And so that's how they got together. And then my story is that after they got married at Bristol Stapleton Church, and then went back to Ohio, where he was from, Cleveland, Ohio, and he finished his degree at Ohio University in journalism. And then after he graduated, my sister was a year old. They went back to England, and I they found I was on the way, and Dad couldn't get a job in the UK because it was after the war, and he was US, and so his journalism professors conspired to find him a job at an Ohio newspaper as a reporter, sight unseen, and got hired. All he had to do was hop on the ship, and at that time they cruised a lot, my parents, and so they hopped on the SS Caronia in Liverpool, got wonderful photos of it, and my mother was very pregnant, which I don't know why back then they let them on the ship that way. And so my first transatlantic voyage was in utero.
Brilliant.
And my grandmother wanted me to be born there, and she comforted herself saying, oh well, the baby will have good sea legs, which I do. And so then I was born about 6 7 weeks later, after they landed in New York City, took a train to Ohio. My dad stayed at that newspaper for 40 years. Yeah, he was a great journalist. Wonderful. So yeah, growing up, wow, 50s. Yeah, and I was like, my hometown, Mansfield, Ohio, was like a ad hoc settlement center for people after World War II. And so we were like citizens of the world. It was like, we're from everywhere, Greek, Polish, you know, um, Italian, French, whatever. And so I was sort of one of the token, English. Um, yeah, the 50s, pretty staid. Both my parents were sort of leftist intellectuals, and my dad was a jazz drummer, uh, and actually told me secretly, uh, no, well, not too secretly, that during the summer of love, and I started smoking. I started experimenting with marijuana. I was 16. He took me aside and he said that he also had. So that was really cool. And all his pals were like beats. And some of my, especially like in like junior high in the United States, and high school, a lot of the teachers were actually, beatniks, but sort of played it straight for their day job. And some of them had goatees, and actually said daddy-o, which is really cool. No one says that anymore.
Maybe there should be a revival. Yeah.
Right.
Daddy Yeah.
Daddy, and all that. But they all knew my dad and my mother, and my dad was like a poet, a painter, jazz drummer, blah 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 blah. So I grew, and my mother was like, she trained as an opera singer and she was a dancer. So I sort of grew up in a real artistic family, which was awesome, and they were very very progressive, really supportive, and really, for all of us, my siblings and myself, really nurtured our nature, our individual natures, and it was just so cool. I mean, I was sort of in training as a hippie chick from the time I was born because of my dad, right? Because of that influence. So yeah, I took art lessons twice a week with all the other squirrely misfit teenagers. And so and I just came into it naturally. Um, we came back to England to you know UK. I mean, it was called England at the time. Um, in 1964, because my grandfather had suffered a series of heart attacks, and my mother was the middle child, the only daughter, and so we came and stayed with him. And right after we left, he did pass away. So we were very grateful that we did. But then 1964, on my birthday, July 28th, 1964, was the debut of A Hard Day's Night. And that's when like all the music was happening. I love the Beatles, but I also love the Stones, especially Brian Jones, who like was a real hero of mine. And I saw the Beatles August 14th, 1966. And also in 66, I saw the Stones up in Cleveland, Cleveland Arena. And Brian Jones was still alive. And, he's playing a sitar and all that stuff. And I saw all the bands. I saw Hendrix. What date was that? Yeah, March 3rd, 1968, and Cream, May 5th, 1968. Um, yeah, saw Jefferson Airplane, blah blah blah. So right away, I love the Kinks. Never got to see the Kinks, but like being in England in the summer of 1964, Top of the Pops, Ready Steady Go, and just totally into the scene, and really really dug it. So I was always sort of almost like a guy in terms of my recall and my knowledge of the rock and roll bands, what instruments they played, blah 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 blah. So I was just a real geek. So and then it went on from there. So yeah, it all followed, and then there was the Summer of Love. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if you have any questions.
Yeah, and that was already really really fascinating. I'd like to rewind a little bit
All right.
to your parents and the Beat
Uh-huh.
generation, because I mean, I largely only know what I've read or seen on telly about the hippies, but the Beats are another step further removed. And of course, there was less and less media as we go back in time to record this stuff. So, did they, for instance, did they call themselves beatniks? Were they, self-identifying as beatniks, or was that something that came later that they got labeled with?
By the time I cottoned on to it, that's an Ohio phrase, I think. Um, they were already being identified as the Beats. Now, there are like various ideas about where the name came from. My father seemed to say and believe that it had something to do with they were laying down the beat, and they were really at a certain point really associated with jazz and the improvisation of jazz, and they're just following the flow and really being intuitive in the moment and just really really expressive. So for me, because of my father, who was a jazz drummer, and was like in that scene, with all the jazz greats, he'd seen all of them, blah 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 blah, that maybe that's not the right interpretation, but I think it'll serve. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm happy. Well, I'm taking your word for it. You were there, you know. Quite a few people I've spoken to who went through or who grew up at sort of the same time as you, um,
Hmm.
or roughly the same time as you, but in the UK, they talk of this kind of transition from a very grey England
Mhm.
to sort of exploding into colour in sort of, you know, roughly around the mid 60s. I guess the time we think of as swing in London in the UK. Um,
Mary Quant and all that stuff. And
yeah,
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 mini skirts and
yeah, 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 yeah.
psychedelic clothes beginning, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
Was it like that in the United States?
Um, Different, of course. What it was, especially for us, I think, is that sort of oppressive conformity, which is really, really odd because, you know, the US is a melting pot. And on one hand, as said, growing up in my hometown where we were all citizens of the world, and also a lot of Black people who we were all colorblind about. And this whole sort of Black Lives Matter thing is sort of curious because Ohio is a northern state, and Ohio was where the Underground Railroad was. And they were really anti-slavery, and that really got behind like, you know, civil rights and wanting and freeing the slaves. So my experience in Ohio would not be the same as someone in the southern states. And seriously, from my experience and my growing up there, I really didn't see any hint of racism, and it's true. So, but in total, what was going on in the United States at the time was that there was this um picture perfect, like Father Knows Best, and all these television shows like Leave It to Beaver, where they're showing the family life is just so wholesome and uh, really oppressive, sort of against individualism and freedom. And so I think that particularly, and also aspects of religion worming its way into everyday life and other, you know, people's, you know, individual lives. And I was raised by two, you know, very, very progressive free thinkers. But I do recall that in when the Beatles hit, I started growing my hair, and it was really short and cropped, right? And I've never, you know, I've always had long hair after that. And um, mothers of my friends did call my mother and ask her why they allowed me to grow my hair long. Is that curious?
Seems very weird now, doesn't it?
Doesn't
Particularly
it?
for women, you know,
Mhm.
you can get it a bit more if it was for men back then, but for
Right,
women, yeah,
right.
I didn't
And
even
then my
know. Yeah,
yeah, my brother started growing his hair, and they you know, it seemed like some of the townsfolk had the same reaction. At which point, my parents really became wonderfully staunch regarding me. And my mother's pat answer was like, well, it's her hair, isn't it? And sort of like, you know, I love my parents. A lot of people don't like their parents. Mine were just super duper. But anyhow, no, it's just a really odd time. So um rock and roll was the um ways and the means towards like moving forward to personal freedom. The beats were there right before them. Also, the bikers. And I knew a lot of bikers, Hell's Angels in my hometown. I love the guys. They're big, burly guys. And I was just really sort of sassy and loved just having the run of the town, and walked a lot and just sort of was really interested in everything. Um, and I always knew that they had my back. They even said, "Hey, we're, you know, we're keeping a watchful eye on you and some of, you know, my friends." And so nobody messed with us. Isn't that cool?
yeah, yeah. It must have given you a lot of comfort, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they sort of knew I didn't need it because I was pretty sassy. But anyhow, but no, you're right. And it was like, especially well, it was leading up to it, like, 64, it was the Beatles and the Stones and the Kinks and, all those people, the Yardbirds, blah, 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 blah. And the blues influence from that, which, the blues sort of like had a relationship with jazz and, all the musicians. And so that was sort of the locomotive, I think, is, rock and roll set us free. And so we just followed that path. And then, then all the whole California scene with the surfers and the Beach Boys and all that, and what was going on in San Francisco. San Francisco was really sort of the hotbed of the beats. City Lights bookstore with founder Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and he in what year was that? 65, maybe 63. That he deliberately, understanding what it might mean, he published Ginsberg's Howl, and he sort of realized that there was going to be some trouble from it, and Ginsberg sort of buggered off somewhere to Morocco or something, and sort of left Ferlinghetti like holding the bag, and Ferlinghetti was brought up on obscenity charges.
Really? Okay.
Uh-huh. And so he very deliberately, yeah, you could read all about it. Like, he's a real hero because of Ferlinghetti and setting that precedent regarding publication. It really set the bar for freedom of expression in the arts. And, we owe a lot to him. And so it's no surprise that because of the tone that was set in San Francisco in terms of freedom of expression, that was sort of where the whole scene unfolded. Haight-Ashbury, and then the promoter, was it Bill Graham? Yeah, Bill Graham, who he all the music halls and stuff, that he really had a lot to do uh with how it went and the popularity of the music. Now, the Doors were LA based, but a lot of the other bands were, like Berkeley and San Francisco. So
Mm, mm.
yeah, it just and you're right about the color. It was like the whole. I like that you said that it was sort of gray and drab, and suddenly all the colors burst, and yeah, it went on from there.
Yeah, yeah, and that not just the drugs, but um,
Yeah.
so you saw the Beatles. I've got to ask you about that. Was it all the kind of screaming and you couldn't hear the band sort of situation?
Yeah, well, I have the ticket stub actually. I have it with me, which is hilarious. But hey, once a rock and roll girl, always a rock and roll girl. But yeah, it was at Cleveland Stadium. It was at the baseball field in Cleveland. Huge. And they'd set them up on the pitcher's mound. So right in the middle of the stadium. And they had several acts leading up to the Beatles. And yeah, there was screaming and, like, I don't know, flashlights, all over the stadium. But of course, like, a flashlight's not going to, go the distance. So but with it being that big vast ball field, it wasn't deafening. So,
Were
but
you screaming? Were you in that manic state?
no, I'm pretty circumspect about it. But I was really enthusiastic, but I'm not by nature a screamer, or I've got a real sort of like, what would you say? I've built houses, and I've done a lot of road trips, and I'm whatever. I've got a real sort of side to me, and you're never gonna see me paint my nails or anything like that. Never have, never will. So I'm not terribly, there. But the interesting thing about when the Stones played at Cleveland Arena is that I always ended up getting good seats. So at the end of the concert, like there was a surge and people like sort of stormed the stage, and I was just right by my seat, and the Cleveland, Ohio cops, I got billy clubbed on the top of the head, not cold.
Jesus. Yeah.
Right, I know. I was just standing there, and yeah, one of my sister's friends, Cher from my hometown, saw it happen, and I woke up. I was in the women's they call them bathrooms or restrooms in the United States, and she was with one of her friends splashing water on my face, and I had a real goose egg. And
Blimey.
yeah, so when I got back, my friend's mother had driven us up there and got, obviously, but yeah, they were just swinging their billy clubs and hitting whoever they could. So, like concerts, what are you going to do?
God. Mm.
I know.
Okay. Let's zoom quickly onto the summer of love then, and something a bit nicer. Um,
Ah,
you're in Ohio when you become aware of the summer of love, I presume.
mhm.
Was it covered a lot in the media, or did you just find out sort of by in the wind, or
Yeah,
how did
well, we didn't call it that. And, I guess what I was going, it was the lead up to the summer of love was like the Birds and all the bands. And it was a progression, right? And it
right?
was just the momentum got going. And then there was a song about if you're going to San Francisco, make sure to wear flowers in your hair. So it just was a progression, and a movement, and it was genuine. It was peace and love, and it was like the Vietnam War was going on, and it had a lot of sort of anti-war thing that was part of it, and just being different people than the generation before us, the people in charge. And we had our own lingo. And as a matter of fact, I'm friends with a lot of poets of my age, and we're even thinking of getting a hippie dictionary put together because we didn't want anybody to understand what we were saying. So it was sort of like coded language.
Mm, mm.
And
Yeah, yeah, that happened in the gay scene, happened in the criminal scene as well, in England, certainly. Yeah.
yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. You just, you don't want, it's your own language. So we essentially at that point we're calling ourselves heads, as in thinking people, versus the straight people. And so yeah, it was a progression, and it built up. And then suddenly, during that summer, there were hordes of hippies who had sort of decided to absolutely disavow whatever their lifestyle, what was going on or being oppressed, and they all moved out to San Francisco and lived in communes and blah 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 blah. And then the media picked up on it, like after it was already going on. And I don't know who coined the summer of love, to be honest. I have no idea. But so there were a whole things like love-ins, be-ins. Have you heard of those?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so and like happenings and sort of spontaneous uh events, either having to do with a concert, but then Golden Gate Park also was a real gathering place for all these events. So, yeah.
Did you go to San Francisco at this point? Wear flowers in your hair, perhaps?
I tried. You'll love this story. It's hilarious. All right. So it was like 3 weeks after my 16th birthday, and school was going to start, and I was going to head to San Francisco. I had gotten some money together from babysitting kids, and I had found an ID uh, that was like a temporary driver's license that had belonged to my sister's boyfriend, and I altered it, and it was his first name was Douglas, and so I sort of scritched on it and put Dorcas, which is hilarious. I dressed in disguise because I had really long hair, and so I and I bought a train ticket to San Francisco at the Mansfield train depot. And I had told one of my friends that I was going to do this, and she was really worried about me. And so, I set off. I have my little, rucksack, blah, blah, blah. And I was in disguise, and I hopped on the train in Mansfield, Ohio. And my mother, my friend had told my parents. So it was going to stop in Chicago, and then it was going to continue on to San Francisco. So my parents were alerted, and my dad knew all the detectives and such like. And so he called up the detective, and they ascertained that I was on the train. So he called ahead to the authorities, and I think it was in Plymouth, Indiana. And so they stopped the train in Plymouth, Indiana before it got to Chicago, where I would have been lost. And so I was traveling with like some Amish people, and they're really cool. I remember they had like a old-fashioned suitcase, and they'd opened the suitcase and got some celery out, and they offered me some celery. So here I am munching on the celery. And the train stopped. Everybody's like, why is the train stopping? Why is the train stopping? And then like some officers got on board, and they came right up to me and they asked me, are you Lesley Constable? I said, no. And they said, I think you are. You better come with us. And so then as I got off the train, I could see everybody looking out, like staring at me. And the officer was really cool. His name was Leslie too. And so he took me to the soda shop and bought me a burger and a milkshake, and waited for my parents to come pick me up. So that's my story. That's why I didn't get to San Francisco.
At least you tried.
I tried. But anyhow, no, I hadn't thought about that for years. Anyhow,
How did it feel, the summer of love? Did you think the world was changing?
yeah, thanks. That's a good question. It felt actually pretty magical, and that everything that had gone before, um, like not looking back, that we were sort of creating our own world. And it was a magical moment. And it was really, you know, sort of like we were levitating on the strength of the music, and which sort of unified us. Yeah, it did unify us. And the lyrics and some of the songs of the era, what they were talking about, and um very, very liberating, and the art that was going on. And yeah, it was just a wonderful moment. And then again, like Vietnam at the time, my sister was 2 years older, and for a while there were like funerals at least every month, if not twice a month, of her classmates having died in Vietnam and their bodies being brought back to be buried. That's a tough thing for that tender age to be going through. And we didn't think it was a justified or righteous war whatsoever, not like, say, World War II or World War One, that yeah, it was more an ideological war, and that it was not necessary or appropriate to be involved, for us to be involved in. So, well, and Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and all those folks, the folk music scene, they were sort of woven into rock and roll. I remember when Dylan like went electric at the Newport Folk Festival in 1966, and got booed off the stage by the folk music people, and then like the rest was history. So yeah, all that stuff. But no, it felt that we were creating things, and we did change the culture. We did change the country and open it up. It was important.
Was there a feeling that you weren't going to just change things, but actually create utopia?
Hmm. Yeah, probably. especially with the whole communal living thing. I actually lived in a commune. Uh, yeah, it worked out okay. Uh, yeah, it was good while it lasted. By the time Woodstock came along in 1969, I'd pretty much stopped going to concerts um, because of, um, I'm little, I'm small, I'm only 5 feet tall. And then, how the crush of the crowds. And there were a couple times that I felt like I was close to getting swept away and, harmed by the crush. And then um, at that point too, there were a lot of like people who like in my high school were just sort of numbskull, like, frat boys or um, football players who sort of, started experimenting with drugs, and they weren't about the whole vibe behind it. They were just about getting stoned. There's a difference between getting high and getting stoned.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
get you.
So,
I've got,
and huh?
uh, I just wanted to pick up on the fact that throughout your description of the Summer of Love and so on, you've touched on the peace movement and the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
and you've touched on communal living, etc. But the first time you actually mentioned drugs was in the negative context of the frat boys getting into them a bit later. Um,
Yeah.
my understanding from a distance of both time and geography would be that LSD was quite a massive part of what
Mhm.
happened in San Francisco,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever read hilarious account of Ken Kesey and his bus full of merry pranksters.
The Tom Wolfe
That
book.
Tom Wolfe,
Yeah.
he was a journalist who hung out with him, and
Tell
the
you what,
yeah, the
that
culmination. Oh,
book.
you yeah, tell that guy. Yeah, electrical it off the test. So the culmination is, yeah. Well, guess what happens? And that whole thing. But uh, yeah, that experimentation. I experimented. I actually did some Owsley acid. Not many
Did
people
you?
have. I did. It's a four-way tab. And my skinny, tiny little friend Tony and I um, got the half of it that was loaded with it, and then our larger friends Barb and Brian didn't get off at all, and yeah, I sort of melted, turned into a skeleton. and then I and then as I was talking, I saw Dayglow alphabet like coming out of my mouth, A's and W's, and I said A's and W's, and they were swirling around people's heads and then going into their nostrils and coming out their ears. And so yeah, no, the real deal. But yeah, I'm pretty I'm just really middle ground. I'm not very excessive. So like, wow, that was interesting. It was sort of like, trippy and scary. And so, I didn't experiment much because that was sufficient. And yeah, getting high was cool, but I'm pretty middle ground. I'm not that excessive. But yeah, I did know and meet and I was friends with a lot of people who just couldn't get enough. And that was a lot of learning that went on because I think that nothing like that had happened before ever. That, you're dealing with a huge population of people in altered states. And then what do you do? And I was often designated sort of the caretaker, or I designated myself
Right.
to like anchor other people. And it's sad. I hate to say, but lost some people along the way. Unfortunately, a lot of people on motorcycles without helmets, and getting high and being on motorcycles and that sort of thing. But it was sobering, some of it, and it was fun. But then I learned a lot about from observing others and what happened with them. and I was really tight with a pretty huge group of people, including the bikers. And there were always those like watchful eyes, and I ended up being sort of one of those. Um, because at that point, with no this, it set a precedent. Nobody had ever, experienced en masse that level of experimentation with mind altering drugs. And there was just a lot of learning that had to go on. If your whole goal is living, surviving, you know, you had to approach it a certain way. And then there were the examples of the excess, like Jim Morrison, and some of the ones who didn't last that long. So it was just a real interesting time. And so by 69, with Woodstock, people have said to me, "Oh, you're going to Woodstock, aren't you?" It's like, no, no, I don't need to. I've already experienced a lot, and I don't, there were too many like gate crashers and hangers on who weren't like the purity of the movement seemed to have like gotten dissipated. And then, of course, there was the famous example of the Altamont Speedway where the Stones did their free concert, and how that how it turned, how it backfired. My opinion, if you want to hear it, is that, yeah, like, CIA, like, I think that they helped bring in cocaine and distribute it. It ruined the movement.
Yeah, I read a book recently, ostensibly about the Manson murders, and it's called Chaos, the book. And
Mhm.
this guy, I think it took him 30 years to write the book because he kept going down all these rabbit holes of
Mhm.
stuff, and he ends up with these conspiracies of CIA movements, two black op movements that were specifically to sort of um, to undermine the hippies and the Black Panthers, essentially.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Really, really. So this was just at the, I haven't really much talked about it, and I haven't read anything about it because it was intense to be part of it. And so I pretty much, I haven't hermetically sealed that part of my life, but I pretty much have respect for what I experienced then, and I just pretty much keep it whole in terms of the good parts of it. And then I do have memories of, when this negative stuff swooped in and what was fueling it. But there were some like dark, shadowy stuff going on the outskirts of it. And we were pretty alert to people who were not hip masquerading as hip, and we immediately notified narcotics agent, right?
yeah, yeah,
To be very, very, like, like all like the coded language and stuff, to be very, very careful to not get snagged by that sort of thing. But there was a lot of effort put in, I think, to infiltrate the movement, um, because there were a lot of like really well educated young people. And then Reagan came in and dumbed down the education system. Why? Because they didn't want another generation like ours, you know cocked, aimed, and loaded, ready to change society, and which we did. We changed society. And but yeah, you mentioned Manson. So uh all that, it did with Altamont and Manson, it that dark aspect of it came through, and it was sobering. I think a lot of us, including me, sort of, I went pretty interior, and my default is, I'm a painter and a poet, so my default is art, and palling up with like kind, and like in terms of community where I felt safe and supported. And so that's sort of what ended up happening after all that there was a whole movement going to New Mexico, where I ended up moving to and living with the communes there, and sort of cloistering with like kind. Do you see what I'm saying?
I was going to ask you, how you dealt with the sort of the decline of the purity and just the decline of perhaps
Yeah.
what it meant to you and so on, because that must be a difficult place to deal with once you've sort of seen such
Oh,
beauty or whatever, and then watching it slip away.
yeah. Yeah, it was. Well, it was nothing happens that fast, but like I said, the event of Altima was really sobering. And then the Manson murders. And I was part of a big, we called ourselves like a gang, or what we, it was a good gang, it wasn't the, in that the negative sense. And we were friends with hippies statewide because we identified one another. And we had this whole network of people who were hip that we trusted, who were like part of the movement and all that. And then after the Manson murders in our hometown, we were really we were just part of what was going on, and it looked like we were just friends, and we didn't have any problems. There were occasions when we would be coming back from a concert and we'd stop at like a truck stop to have a hamburger or coffee or something. And then I remember clearly us sitting at a table and, like, feather boas, our hippie garb and all that. And having like at one point truckers circling our table and like actually holding up like my male friend's hair and going, do you think he's a girl? What do you think? Is this a girl or a boy? And like really, really hassling us and us having to be very, very quiet. And then the Manson murders, my parents even warned me and said that they had been approached by people who are wondering if my friend Brian wasn't like Manson and sort of a head of the gang with all his chicks who were murderesses, and so they warned us and they sort of invited everybody over to the house and said, hey, you guys, I know you're all tight, we know all they've known them since they children, but you've got to be really, really careful and sort of dial it down because because of the murders, it's sort of drawn attention to what's going on with you. That was a sobering moment. That was really hard. Yeah. There also was the incident that Brian, um, he was what, I knew him since I was 9, and he's gay. And his parents gave him a sewing machine when he was 10. And he ended up opening up a boutique in New York and did a whole fashion line after Fellini's Satyricon. And then he was in the first wave of people who died of AIDS, unfortunately. But he, for one of the concerts, oh no, we went to a matinee to see Valley of the Dolls, with the film about pill poppers, and so he'd made himself an outfit. He'd gone to Gentili's thrift store on the other side of the tracks and got himself a huge old flag. So he cut it up and made a cool vest and bell bottoms out of this flag, right? So there we were at Manners Big Boy on Park Avenue West after the matinee. It was Sunday and all these church going people. We saw this old guy like looking really furious, and I observed that he'd gone up and picked up the phone that was in the restaurant and made a call. Pretty soon a police car arrived, and the officers got out, went right up to Brian and said, and they touched the fabric of his vest and said, is this Old Glory, which is the name for the US flag? And Brian stayed silent, and they said, son, you better come with us. They arrested him for desecrating the flag by cutting it up and making an outfit out of it. And the next day, the front page of the newspaper were the detectives holding up the vest and the bell bottoms and saying, like, because he was a minor, that he was arrested on charges. But poor guy, he sort of had persecution complex after that. But no, it was a weird time. And so going through that transition of sort of having to look over your shoulder And then, and cocaine came in and it really did ruin the movement because it was a nasty drug.
Mm.
And it wasn't anything having to do with peace and love or enlightenment. Nothing
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. Cocaine was the sort of thing that brought in the '80s in many ways, didn't it? Culturally, I suppose. Um,
Yeah.
so you went off to New Mexico to live in a commune, yeah?
Well, not at that time. I lived in a commune in Ohio,
Oh,
and
right.
it was,
Okay.
yeah, it was a state senator's mansion. And it was really cool house. And I still am friends with a lot of my pals from there. I was the only chick of a whole bunch of guys, and I kept saying, look, I'm not cleaning up after you just because I'm female. Here's the list. So that sort of thing. But no, it was really cool. And that was a little bit later on. That was in the early 70s. So we'd sort of
Okay.
gotten through that whole dark moment. And then we sort of paced ourselves regarding how it was going to go from there. So I think we all, as a movement, we did recover and get into the 70s and sort of figure that out. But later I moved to New Mexico.
Okay, right. I've read what appeared to me to be quite justified criticisms of the hippie movement in the sense, this is specific reference to when everybody kind of went off to live in communes in the middle of nowhere and so on, that there was uh, a lot of situations where women were harassed and a lot of situations where women were still expected to do the cooking or even roll the joints. It seemed like that didn't get as progressive as other parts of it. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, no, it was. And luckily one of the commune members was a guy who was the only male in his family. He had 8 sisters.
Wow.
Myron. And he was like, no, guys, this is not cool. And he was the one who got the list together and put it on the door and said, okay, Jeff, you're going to be sweeping, blah, 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 blah. And no, it absolutely, they want that. And they didn't even think twice about it that, okay, I'm female, I've got to do that. And I said, look, I've never been like that. My mother won't even ask me to do the dishes because I can't stand to. I'll do the laundry, but I don't like doing the dishes. And just because I'm female doesn't mean I'm going to. But I was raised by two really progressive people. And I sort of naturally was sort of like first wave feminist. Um, and I was raised to be myself and hold my own and be who I am, and gender had nothing to do with it. So that was really cool. So I was able to sort of stand up for myself, but it was a pain. And that is a good criticism. So you've read that about the communes, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I quite sort of dramatically bad stuff actually with sexual harassment and so on in the Californian uh, ones where they all decided to sort of move away when things got tough. They, as I understand it, a lot of people moved out into the countryside to live communally and just not get hassled anymore by people, I think.
Yeah.
And but in that isolation, uh, there was a lot of abuse went on,
Mhm.
basically.
Unfortunately. Yeah, yeah, not, yes. There was a lot of room for enlightenment. Um, and if you're sort of making up the culture as you go along, um, there's certain aspects that come into play that possibly you were not expecting. But I've read accounts of some of the big rock and roll guys like didn't treat their women all that right and all that, and that was like, so what, so yeah, but
I suppose part of that would have come from or been a mutation, perversion of whatever of free love. Um, was there a lot of that about? Sounds a bit prurient to say it like that, but
no, no, no. Again, I was in favor of being part of like a big group of people that I'd grown up with, or I ended up knowing. And so I'm pretty much always all about like art, and that's what I stay with in terms of the sexual experimentation. I no, it wasn't something I was going to be doing, and it's nothing I did, but I watched it around me. And again, if you're observant, you sort of learn from other people's mistakes. And yeah, and there were at that time, it's really interesting because I think I told you about this older person named Cher, my sister's age, who had sort of, rescued me from being billy clubbed and made sure I was okay. Well, in the whole system though, there were especially like women sort of looked out for one another, if you know what I mean, and would sort of take another woman aside and it's like, are you okay? Do you need my help? And then like, there were male figures who, if we like went, they would come, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was sort of this again, sort of high sign um system to make sure everybody was okay. But there were some chicks who were just like, pretty wild, and they were going to do what they were going to do, and you kept your eye on them. And if who knows what happened behind closed doors. But um yeah, it just wasn't my scene. um
No.
I was just more into uh not to sound like whatever, like a prude or high-minded or anything, but it just looked scary and dark. I mean, you've got to like really sort of, I'm somebody who, I was always somebody who wanted to survive. And I watched people around me who like didn't wear, you know, drove off high on motorcycles, and did all sorts of things, like high in the moment, not heeding what would might go on. I was not one of those. I was always pretty cautious and sort of in the background watching, but I saw a lot, I'm telling you.
Before I forget, Leslie,
Yeah.
early on you mentioned the Underground Railroad, that Ohio was a place of the Underground Railroad. Am I right
Mhm.
in thinking that was a place for draft dodgers from the Vietnam War to get to Canada? Is that what it meant?
Oh no, what I was mentioning is that it was a Civil War era, and what it was an underground network of those who um supported like freedom, slavery, that there was this whole network, underground network of finding avenues for these people to go up north and be safe and be, but then, but the whole dodgers too. There was that whole element of those people who went to Canada to get out of that. So I don't know if it's been called the Underground Railroad.
I think I probably just misunderstood you, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, that's okay. No worries.
Probably watched some film at some point where something like that happened. How much
Yeah,
of how much of the hippie movement for you could be called spiritual?
yeah,
Is that a relevant tag?
absolutely. And yeah, for me, that's what it was actually. Yeah, enlightenment and embracing different disciplines and like the wisdom of the Native Americans. And when I ended up moving to New Mexico, I became friends with, they call themselves Indians. And there's a lot of, beautiful cultural traditions. And yeah. Well, and then I think the whole act of making art is possibly a spiritual enterprise, connecting with, the collective unconscious and ancestral memory. And ended up really appreciating some of Carl Jung's philosophy and wisdom about the subconscious mind and dream state intuition. So there was a whole lot of natural because of the drugs, and actually people taking them really seeking an altered state and more. Well, and Jim Morrison too. I mean, the Doors. Wasn't that from Huxley's Doors of
Mm,
Perception?
yeah.
And so there was a real hunger and a thirst, especially a lot of the lyrics of the songs of that era were exploring spiritual realms, I think, don't you?
Yes, I do. And something else I'm curious about is the Venn diagram crossover, or not. I'll let
Mhm.
you explain this, between the spiritual side of things and also the radical politics with Jerry
Mm.
Rubin, Abbie Hoffman, and those kind of
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Are those two separate strands, or are they congruent, or how did that pan out?
No, you're right. There is a natural connection, like to make to manifest in lived life the, as you say, utopia, to to find a way to liberate um those, on the, in real life, empower them. I loved all those folks. I like the Black Panthers too. um Jerry Rubin, steal this book.
Great title.
Yeah, isn't it funny? uh right. And yeah, there was some amazing thinking and activism going on there. And I haven't really touched on any of that because I became pretty much an activist um, after a lot of that, sort of after the commune era, and more into the middle 70s and later
Well,
70s.
that interests me because I was an activist
Hmm.
later on. What sort of route? What were you an activist about?
Um, Feminism, and also um, like ecology, and protecting nature, and blah 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 blah. Also, peace, anti-war, you know,
Well,
protest.
just as you were speaking before, actually, in response to me asking about radical politics and spirituality, suppose the word peace is actually what joins those two together, really.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and then yeah, and a lot of the musicians, like, well, you think of like John Lennon, and his association with the peace movement and the bed in, and the peace in and all that, and with Yoko Ono. Um, and I think it's, at the moment, it was a proper thing to do because he was in a position that people listened to him. And I always had a lot of admiration for him. As a journalist, this was later on, this was like in 88. I had the honor of interviewing Yoko Ono. I have a tape of it. I could probably send you if you'd want to hear it. And
I
it's
love
more
it.
of
Yeah.
just a conversation because I always admired her, and knew about her as an artist before, I mean, that it wasn't just that, I remember asking my editor, or saying to my editor, that Yoko had released John's prints, or drawings as lithographs after his death, and was sending them to various galleries throughout the world. And one of them was in Columbus, Ohio, and I was aware of it. And so I said to my editor, a woman, Tony, I said, hey, I think I'm going to try to interview Yoko Ono. And she said, well, why would you want to do that? The bitch broke up the Beatles.
Okay.
And I went ahead anyhow. But I guess that I had to wait 3 days before I got permission. When I heard from somebody later on saying that at the time it was because Yoko Ono wanted to check me out, like ask her psychic to check me out to see if I was okay. So I was
Right. Okay.
psychically approved.
Oh, you got the magical thumbs up then. Okay.
Yeah. But anyhow, yeah, she seemed to know a lot about me, and that I was a real fan of John's and all that. But anyhow, no, to get back to all that, yeah, it was really important work, and it just was woven into, the music, um, the experimentation, the what was going on, like in the arts in general, fashion and all that, the whole Vietnam War was sort of a backdrop, and then also, of course, the peace movement, and then environmental interests too. And so all of that, and like the whole back to nature with going to the communes and learning what our grandparents knew about um, being back, growing food and quilting and all that. So
Yeah.
all those things, making candles. Um,
Smelling like your grandparents as well. I think this is something people don't seem to pick up on much, but
yeah.
every relative of ours would have smelled of wood smoke, for instance. And but now we look at it as a really weird smell, So
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And if you have a wood burning stove, you end up smelling like smoke. So
yeah, yeah.
I quite like it, but you know,
It's a very specific smell, isn't it?
yeah.
What was the relationship? I'll tell you what, I'm thinking here, Lesley. I would like to do a second part of this if you're cool, because
Sure, sure.
we haven't really got past the mid-70s yet. I, but so what I'm thinking is if we could perhaps deal with the hippie stuff tonight and then deal with the post-hippie stuff in a second.
Yeah,
Would that be good?
that would be wonderful. No, it's just really interesting to revisit all this and think about it and how everything interconnects
Yeah.
and um and it does, and the whole peace movement and all that moved that way.
Well,
No, a lot.
absolutely. Peace is still a big issue, sadly, isn't it?
Sure.
There's a couple of other aspects of the hippie 60s thing that I wanted to talk to you about. And one of them is how kind of whole food shops, as they were probably known, and what's become health shops in the UK, what's become known as health shops in the UK.
Right.
Um, I don't really know a great deal about that in terms of America, apart from I know the first shop of its kind was pretty much in San Francisco, and I think it's the Diggers that started it, perhaps.
Mhm.
Um, and now we have them everywhere you go, and certainly every city in Europe seems to have things like a body shop and a shop that sells vegetarian food and all that sort of stuff. So, and co-ops as well, of course, cooperatively owned businesses and cooperatively
Mhm.
run businesses. Did you have much experience of that, even if it was just like being aware of these things?
Oh yeah, no, no, no. Well, my great grandmother was a midwife, and my grandmother was one of many sisters, and she worked the midwifery business along with their mother. And she also knew her herbs, and so she was sort of like the village healer and an herbalist. And so there was real keen interest always regarding like things grown and herbs and the healing qualities. And there is like Herbs Etc. in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was founded in the early 70s, and it's still there. And they still, go and hand gather and hand grow a lot of their medicinal herbs. And I think it's, again, the hippie generation was just sort of like, back to nature, wanting to make sure that the old ways weren't lost. And I don't know if you agree with it, but I just think that it's really important with, the pharmaceuticals and the corporations. And it was also, just like small businesses, and just keeping those alive and growing. And then also food co-ops and, honoring your body and honoring nature. And yeah. Mm.
The other thing is money, which I think is perhaps a bit more of a confusing thing that the hippies had relationships with, really, because um, here's my perception. Okay, now feel free to tell me I'm really wrong, because A, I am way too young to have any direct experience of this, and B, we're talking about also the differences or potential difference in America and in England
Right.
about
Right.
this, but it seemed like from a distance, from what I've read, etc., with those caveats, it seems like that the hippie movement was a very privileged movement financially. That a lot of a lot of the hippies kind of could do this stuff because they were relatively comfortable. Is
Hmm.
is that is that fair or is that nonsense? I'm not saying that's what I think even really, but I'm curious as to what you think.
Right. Well, yeah, there's an aspect, but the American middle class at that point um, was pretty normal. There are very few people who were sort of above it and very few people who were below it. It was the middle class. It was most people, and they were financially comfortable, not wealthy, but financially comfortable.
Yeah,
So that was sort of a very shared common experience of being comfortable and not having to want. However, if you were going to live that lifestyle, that you had to pretty much figure out how to make it work for you and manifest and have some integrity and responsibility regarding that. And that was a lot of interesting learning because I mean my dad was a journalist. Journalists are never wealthy ever. I ended up being one too, and I often worked like 5 jobs. I have 4 kids. I worked a lot of jobs, and I'm not afraid of work. They were
yeah.
all project based, so I was able to do them all, and taught at uni and was paid for that. Blah blah blah. But yeah, and it was clear early on that scroungers weren't thought of very highly, and they were identified as like any sort of chick showed up and she wanted to live off people. That happened, and like uh you sort of didn't want that. You just had to sort of pull your weight, and no scrounging allowed. And I don't know about the punk scene, because that's an interesting era from my point of view, but I
Mm.
don't know how that went in
Well,
that era with all y'all.
Well, I'll tell you what, next time it'd be quite interesting to have a chat about the punk scene versus the hippie scene because so many similarities, I would say, but
I'm
also some
sure.
vital differences. And
I'm sure.
both of those things I think are really interesting. And many people wanted it to be a sort of black and white binary thing where there are either it's a complete continuation or it was a completely new thing. And
Mhm.
as usual, the truth isn't really kind of in either of those camps. I'm quite fascinated by what you said about, you're not afraid of work, etc., because it seems to me also another impetus in the late 60s was actually the abolition of work in the kind of way that it was known, certainly with the yippies, again, your Hoffmans and Rubins
Right.
and those people, was that we as a species could build a new society where the machines would do all the kind of heavy lifting and
Mhm.
we would be free to actually live lives of more meaning. And indeed, in that manifesto, it also said where every person can be an artist. And
Mhm.
that sort of ties in as well with what you were saying about art as well, I think. Um, so what was the sort of attitude to the work ethic in amongst your kind of contemporaries?
Hmm.
The work ethic rather than actually the realities of having to survive, I'm thinking.
Right. Well, I mean, there were some of them that sort of lived off of their parents, most not. And it was sort of the beginning of my pattern of I multitask, and because that's sort of what you do. You've got to, what am I good at? How can I make money? How can I survive? And sort of piece it together as best you could and lead with your strengths. And I ended up sort of the fallback was I went to university late. I was already a parent, single parent, and on the strength of my background and my abilities, I sort of got into a university. And then once I got my undergraduate degree, I had my advanced degrees funded. because I also taught and did other sorts of things. But I also, my degree was in journalism, and so I also made my living as a writer and various other things, and sort of pieced it together. But you know and I'm still, the people I surround myself with still sort of just like me, they sort of piece things together, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. um I when in when I live in Mexico, I'm part of the artisan market vendor community. I make posters and postcards and prints of my art, and my partner, who's Mexican, makes his great grandmother's and grandmother's recipes of chilies and salsas and sells those. And so, you just sort of piece it together what you can, but I know a lot of women who make clothes and sell them, and make jewelry and sell that. And that's sort of, sort of a, um, like an older form of how we function and how we survive. It's just,
And we're told it's going to be necessary for everybody pretty much as a new working model, aren't we? That the days of one job, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, are largely gone for coming generations. So
is
you
that
were
true?
you were ahead of the curve.
You think? Yeah. Well, for me, I'm pretty active, and I have worked, I'm just not, I don't want to be stuck in a building from 9 to 5. My father, as a journalist, um, was out on his beat, never really stuck in a building. So I think I went into journalism just so I could be walking around and communicating with people and getting their story and writing about their stories, and like my dad did, because that's really comfortable. Just being out out and about, gathering information and sharing it, that's really, really a comfortable thing. And because, yeah, being stuck in one building all day is like, oh.
Yeah, yeah, cool. There's so much more I want to say. This is why I want to split the interview into two,
Okay, sorry, yeah,
because
blah blah
what I
blah.
wanted to avoid uh, is rushing through anything,
Yeah.
because you've got so much interesting stuff to say
Okay.
about everything we've spoken to. So I think
Yeah.
this would probably be a good idea to call the halftime whistle, if uh,
Okay.
if you're cool with that, Lesley.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
so that was absolutely fascinating.
Oh, cool.
It really was. There was just so many things so many subjects I'm fascinated in. A couple I missed, like
Hmm.
the Kent State shootings in Ohio and
The what things? No.
the the shootings at Kent State University and the anti-war.
Um,
Just because of the Ohio connection, really. But we
May
can always
4th.
come back to this stuff.
Yeah, May 4th, 1970.
Have you got a photographic memory or something? Because you
Something like
mentioned all those concerts, you knew the exact dates as well. That's quite astonishing. Amazing. Anyway, look, before I get into waffling, which is probably there's an ember light on that one. Um, thank you so much.
that.
I'll stop recording in a second, and then if you don't mind, we can hang around. And I'll just thank you properly
Oh, for sure.
afterwards. But that was absolutely fascinating. Absolutely
Excellent.
fascinating. A real window into
Mhm.
those times, which I think are certainly some of the most interesting times we've had in
Oh,
certainly
yeah.
post-war history, and the most important as well. A lot of things got born then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as we were talking, I was seeing in my mind's eye the people, the faces. Just that was wonderful, revisiting that time, and
Yeah.
the energy. So that was really lovely for me to go back and revisit all that. Just lovely. Hmm.
Well, let's do some more of that next time. Then that would be really good. So
Okay.
for now, I'll stop recording here, and I'll just
All
like to
right.
say, Lesley Constable, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and for your fascinating story. And
Mhm.
see you in part 2.
Okay. Thank you.